The ropes cut into Alira Hartley's wrists as 3 warriors dragged her across the frozen ground toward the edge of the world. She did not scream. She had already screamed enough that morning, and no one had listened. The moon hung pale and silent above the pine trees, and the wind carried the low chanting of the pack elders standing in a circle around the chasm known only as the abyss. Alira twisted her head and searched the crowd for one face that might still care. She found her father first. Edmund Hartley, alpha of the Moonfall pack, stood with his arms folded and his jaw tight, refusing to meet her eyes. Beside him stood Marissa, her stepsister, dressed in a deep red cloak, watching with an expression that could almost be mistaken for satisfaction if you knew where to look. "Please," Alira said, her voice raw. "I did not curse this pack. I did not bring this sickness to our lands." The elder named Aldrich stepped forward, his staff striking the ground with a sound like a closing door. "The prophecy is clear. A daughter of tainted blood must be given to the abyss before the next full moon, or the curse will spread until every wolf in Moonfall falls silent forever." "Tainted blood," Alira repeated bitterly. "You mean my mother's blood? The blood you all whispered about behind closed doors for 18 years. No one answered her. No one needed to. She had always known she was different. Her eyes held a faint silver ring that no other wolf in the pack carried. Her senses reached farther into the dark than anyone else's. She had been told since childhood that this was a flaw, a stain, something to be hidden and quietly ashamed of. Now it seemed that difference had become a sentence. Gareth, the warrior she had once been promised to in marriage, stepped closer. For one brief moment, hope flickered in her chest. Surely he would speak for her. Surely the boy who had once carved her name into the bark of the old oak tree would not stand by and watch her die. "It has to be done, Alira," Gareth said quietly, refusing to hold her gaze. "For the good of the pack." The hope in her chest turned to ash. They walked her to the very edge of the chasm. Alira looked down into the darkness and saw nothing but endless black, a void that seemed to swallow the moonlight itself. Stories had been told about the abyss since she was a child. It was said that centuries ago, an ancient evil had been sealed inside it, and that anyone who fell into its depths would never be seen again. It was the perfect place to dispose of an inconvenient daughter. "Any last words?" Aldrich asked, though his tone made it clear he did not care to hear them. Alira lifted her chin, her wrists burned from the rope, and tears threatened at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of these people. "One day," she said, her voice steady, despite everything, "you will regret this. All of you." Marissa laughed softly, a sound like breaking glass. "Goodbye, sister." The push came suddenly, without warning, without mercy. One moment, Alira stood on solid ground, and the next, she was falling. The cold air rushing past her ears, the faces of her pack shrinking above her until they disappeared into a small circle of moonlight far, far away. She expected the fall to end quickly. She expected pain, and then nothing at all. Instead, the fall seemed to stretch on forever. The darkness around her was not empty as she had assumed. It shimmered faintly, like the inside of a cave lit by veins of glowing mineral. She tumbled through pockets of strange warm air, past what looked like floating specks of light, and for a moment she thought she saw shapes moving far below her, shapes that were not rock or stone. Panic rose in her throat. She tried to twist her body, tried to slow her descent, but there was nothing to grab onto, nothing but darkness rushing past on every side. She thought of her mother, who had died when Alira was only 7 years old, and wondered if she was about to see her again. She thought of the pack she was leaving behind, the home she would never return to, the life that had been stolen from her by people who were supposed to protect her. Then, without warning, the falling stopped. It did not stop the way she expected. There was no crushing impact, no sudden burst of pain. Instead, she landed as gently as if she had stepped off a low stair, her boots meeting smooth black stone with barely a sound. She stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, waiting for the pain to arrive. It never came. Alira opened her eyes, which she had not realized she had closed, and looked around. She was standing in a vast chamber unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were made of polished obsidian, black and gleaming, reflecting faint light from sources she could not identify. Thin lines of silver ran through the stone floor, in patterns that looked almost like veins, or perhaps like ancient writing she could not read. The air was warm, carrying a faint smell of something like burning cedar, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the soft, steady drip of water. "This cannot be real," she whispered to herself, her voice echoing strangely against the high ceiling. She had expected death. She had expected an ending. Instead, she found herself standing in what looked like the ruins of a grand palace, buried far beneath the surface of the earth, where no living wolf had ever been meant to see. She took a few tentative steps forward, her hands still bound behind her back, and studied the towering pillars that lined the chamber. Each one was carved with images she did not recognize, wolves standing upright like people, crowned figures with eyes made of dark gemstone, scenes of battles fought long before her grandmother's grandmother had been born. Dust did not seem to touch this place, despite how ancient it clearly was. Everything gleamed as though it had been polished only yesterday. A soft sound reached her ears, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere beyond the pillars. Elira's heart began to pound. She turned quickly, trying to see where the sound was coming from, but the shifting light made it difficult to judge distance or direction. "Who is there?" she called out, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "Show yourself." The footsteps stopped. For a long, tense moment, there was only silence, and Elira wondered if she had imagined the sound entirely. Then a voice spoke from the shadows, low and calm, carrying an authority that seemed to fill the entire chamber without needing to be raised. "You should not be here," the voice said, "and yet, here you are." Elira spun toward the sound, her bound hands aching, her breath catching in her throat. A tall shape emerged from behind one of the great pillars, moving with the unhurried grace of someone who had never once needed to rush in his entire life. As he stepped into the strange, glowing light, Elira felt her whole body go still. He was unlike anyone she had ever seen. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark robes that seemed to absorb the light around them rather than reflect it. His hair was black as the stone beneath her feet, and his eyes, when they finally met hers, held a color she could not name, somewhere between deep violet and midnight blue, glowing faintly in the dim chamber. There was something ancient about him, something that made the hair on the back of her neck rise, though she could not have said whether it was fear or something else entirely. "Who are you?" Elira asked, forcing herself to stand tall, despite her bound wrists and racing heart. The stranger studied her for a long moment before answering, his gaze moving from her face to the rope around her wrists, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like recognition. "You were thrown here," he said. It was not a question. "Sacrificed to the darkness above, just as the old stories always promised." "How do you know that?" "Because it has happened before," he said simply, though never quite like this. He stepped closer, and Elira instinctively took a step back, her shoulder brushing against the cold stone of a pillar. The stranger paused, seeming to sense her fear, and to her surprise, he did not press forward. Instead, he lifted one hand, and with a small motion, the ropes binding her wrists loosened and fell away, as though they had simply decided to release her. Elira gasped, rubbing at the raw skin of her wrists, staring at him in disbelief. "How did you do that?" "You are standing in my kingdom," the stranger said, his voice carrying quiet weight. "A place your people call the Abyss, though it has a name far older than that. My name is Kaelin Draven. I am the one who rules here." Elira's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything happening around her. A kingdom beneath the earth, a ruler with eyes like the night sky, a place that was supposed to be nothing but death and darkness, yet here she stood, alive and unharmed. "The Obsidian King," she whispered, remembering the old stories the elders used to tell to frighten pack children into obedience. "You are real." "I am," Kaelin said, and something almost like amusement touched the corner of his mouth. "And you, it seems, are the first sacrifice, in a very long time, who has not simply screamed and run." Elira lifted her chin, refusing to let him see how frightened she truly was. "I have had enough of screaming for one day." Kaelin studied her again, longer this time, his violet eyes moving over her face, as though searching for something specific. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him, because he finally nodded, once, and turned to walk back toward the shadows from which he had come. "Come," he said, not looking back to see if she would follow. "There are things you need to understand, Elira Hartley, about this place." about yourself. And about why your pack was so eager to see you disappear. Illyra froze. How do you know my name? Kalen paused at the edge of the light, his back still turned to her, and for the first time, his voice carried something that sounded almost like sorrow. Because I have been waiting for you, he said quietly. For a very long time. The words hung in the warm, glowing air between them, and Illyra felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold stone beneath her feet. Whatever she had expected to find at the bottom of the abyss, it was not this. It was not a kingdom. It was not a king who spoke her name like an old promise finally kept. She did not know yet whether she had fallen into her ending, or into the very beginning of something far greater than the life she had left behind. But as she stepped forward, following the tall figure into the glowing dark, one thing became clear to her. Nothing about her life would ever be the same again. Illyra followed Kalen through a corridor lined with pillars that seemed to breathe faint light with every step she took, as though the stone itself recognized her presence. She kept a careful distance behind him, her senses alert, watching the way his dark robes moved without a single sound against the polished floor. Every instinct told her to be afraid of this man who called himself a king, yet something else, something quieter, told her that fear was not the only thing she should be feeling. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, unable to bear the silence any longer. "To a place where you can rest," Kalen answered, without turning around. "You have fallen a very long way, Illyra Hartley. Even if your body feels no pain, your mind will need time to accept what has happened to you." "My mind accepted it the moment my own pack threw me over the edge," she said, bitterness sharpening her words. "I do not need rest. I need answers." At this, Kalen finally stopped and turned to face her fully. The strange glowing light of the corridor caught the sharp lines of his face, and Illyra found herself momentarily unable to look away from his eyes, deep and endless, like staring into a night sky that had no stars. "Very well," he said. "Ask, and I will answer as honestly as I can." Illyra crossed her arms, refusing to let his presence unsettle her further. Why did they call me tainted? Why did an entire pack decide that a girl with silver eyes had to be thrown into a hole in the ground? Kalen was quiet for a moment, studying her, as though weighing how much truth she could bear all at once. "Long ago," he began, "before your pack ever existed in its current form, there was a great war between the wolves who lived beneath the earth and the wolves who lived beneath the moon. My people, the wolves of Nixheim, once walked freely under open sky. We were not monsters, whatever the surface world came to believe. We were simply different, touched by shadow rather than by moonlight." "Touched by shadow," Illyra repeated softly, glancing down at her own hands as though she might suddenly see darkness curling from her fingertips. "The surface packs feared what they did not understand," Kalen continued, beginning to walk again, slower this time, so that she could keep pace beside him. "They convinced themselves that shadow blood was a curse, a poison that would corrupt their bloodlines if left unchecked. So they drove us underground, sealed the passages between our worlds, and over centuries, they told themselves stories to justify what they had done. They called us monsters. They called this place the Abyss, and they warned their children never to speak of the wolves who once lived openly among them. But some of that blood survived," Illyra said slowly, pieces beginning to fall into place inside her mind, "in the packs above." "Yes," Kalen said, "buried deep, diluted over generations, but never fully erased. Every few decades, a child is born on the surface who carries the old shadow blood strongly enough to be noticed. Silver eyes, heightened senses, a connection to the dark that cannot be explained by moonlight alone." Illyra stopped walking, her heart pounding. "You are saying that I am one of them. One of your people." Kalen turned to face her fully once more, and for the first time, something gentler passed across his expression, something that might have been sympathy. "I am saying that the blood in your veins is not tainted, Illyra. It is ancient. It is powerful. And your pack recognized it long before you ever did, which is exactly why they were so afraid of you." Illyra felt her throat tighten, and she was surprised to find tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness this time, but from something closer to anger. "They knew," she whispered. "They knew what I was, and instead of telling me the truth, they decided it was easier to throw me away." "Fear often chooses the cruelest path," Kalen said quietly. "It has for as long as I have existed. They continued walking, and slowly the corridor opened into a wide chamber that took Alira's breath away. Unlike the grand hall where she had first landed, this room felt almost intimate, warm firelight flickering from unseen sources along the walls, soft dark furs laid across low stone seating, and a small fountain in the corner that bubbled with water so clear it looked like liquid glass. It was, she realized with a strange jolt, beautiful. "You may rest here," Kalen said, gesturing to the room. "No harm will come to you within these walls. That, I promise you." Alira studied him carefully. "Why should I trust the promise of a king I have known for less than an hour?" A faint, almost amused expression crossed Kalen's face. "You should not yet. Trust is not something I expect from you so quickly. But I would ask you to consider one thing. If I meant you harm, Alira Hartley, you would already be gone. I have far easier ways of dealing with intruders than offering them rest and warm firelight." She could not argue with that logic, however unsettling it was to admit. She lowered herself onto one of the fur-covered seats, feeling the exhaustion of the day finally beginning to catch up with her body, even if her mind remained sharp and wary. "There is something else you should know," Kalen said, his tone shifting, becoming more serious. "The seal that keeps this kingdom hidden beneath the earth, the same seal your ancestors created generations ago, has been weakening for many years now." Alira looked up at him sharply. "Weakening how?" "The magic that separates Nixheim from the surface world was never meant to last forever without renewal," Kalen explained. "It requires a connection, a bloodline tie between both worlds, to remain strong. As the surface packs pushed the old shadow blood further and further into hiding, fewer and fewer children were born who could sustain that connection. The seal has grown thin. Cracks have begun to form. And if the seal breaks completely?" Kalen's expression darkened. "Then whatever else lies sealed beneath this kingdom, older and far less patient than my people, will no longer be contained. It is not simply my throne at risk, Alira. It is everything above and below." A cold weight settled in Alira's stomach as she began to understand the true size of what she had stumbled into. "And you believe I am somehow connected to this, to fixing it?" "I do not believe it," Kalen said quietly. "I know it. Your bloodline is the strongest to emerge from the surface world in over 100 years. That is precisely why your pack feared you enough to throw you into a place they believed was nothing but death. Some part of them understood, even if they never spoke it aloud, that you carried enough shadow blood to matter." Alira sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing everything he had told her. Her entire life, she had been made to feel small, wrong, something to be hidden away and quietly ashamed of. Now, in the space of a single conversation, she was being told that her blood might be the key to saving an entire hidden kingdom, and possibly the world above it as well. "Why does this feel like a trade?" she finally said. "One danger for another?" Kalen tilted his head slightly, studying her with something like respect. "Because it is. I will not lie to you and tell you that what lies ahead will be simple or safe. But I will tell you this. Down here, among my people, your blood will not be called a curse. It will be recognized for what it truly is." For the first time since she had fallen from the world above, Alira allowed herself to feel something other than fear or grief. It was small, fragile, barely more than a flicker, but it was there, a quiet sense of possibility. "Teach me," she said finally, meeting his violet eyes without flinching. "If my blood is truly as powerful as you say, then I want to understand what it means. I want to understand what I am." Kalen studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted again, deeper this time, as though he was seeing not just the frightened girl who had fallen into his kingdom, but the queen she might one day become. "Very well, Alira Hartley," he said quietly. "Then let your training begin." Outside the warm chamber, deep within the ancient stone of Nixheim, the faint cracks in the great seal pulsed once, as though something far below had felt her decision, and had begun, ever so slowly, to stir. The following days blurred together in a way Alira had never experienced before. There was no sunrise or sunset in Nixheim, only the steady glow of the obsidian walls and the quiet rhythm of a kingdom that never truly slept. Kalen had assigned one of his most trusted advisors, a sharp-eyed woman named Leora, to guide Alira through the parts of the palace that were safe for her to explore, while Kalen himself attended to matters of his throne, that he did not yet explain in detail. "You ask a great many questions," Leora said one afternoon, if afternoon was even the right word for a place with no sky, as she led Alira down a winding staircase, carved directly into the stone. "Most who fall into this kingdom simply weep and beg to be sent home." "I have no home to be sent back to," Alira replied, keeping her voice steady even though the words still stung. "Not anymore." Leora glanced at her sideways, something like understanding in her sharp features. "Then perhaps it is fortunate that you fell here instead of somewhere else." They reached the bottom of the staircase, and Alira found herself standing at the edge of an enormous underground city, unlike anything she had ever imagined existed beneath the earth. Buildings made of dark polished stone rose in careful, elegant rows, connected by bridges of black metal that glowed faintly with the same silver veins she had seen in the palace floor. Wolves walked among the streets below, some in human form, some in their wolf shapes, all of them carrying themselves with a quiet dignity that Alira had never seen in her own pack. "This is Nixheim," Leora said, a note of pride entering her voice. "Home to every shadow-blooded wolf who was ever driven from the surface world. We built this in secret, over centuries, while your kind told stories about monsters in the dark." Alira stared out at the glowing city in silence, trying to reconcile everything she had been taught as a child, with the truth unfolding in front of her eyes. Why does no one else know this exists? "Because the surface world made its choice long ago," Leora said simply, "and once a story is repeated enough times, people stop questioning whether it was ever true." They continued their walk through the lower levels of the city, and slowly, Alira began to notice something strange. Every wolf they passed seemed to pause, if only for a moment, to glance in her direction. Some bowed their heads slightly, others simply stared, wide-eyed, as though they could not quite believe what they were seeing. "Why do they look at me like that?" Alira finally asked, feeling heat rise in her cheeks under the weight of so much attention. Leora hesitated before answering, choosing her words carefully. "Because there is a prophecy, one that has existed since before either of us were born. It speaks of a wolf born on the surface, carrying shadow blood strong enough to restore the broken seal between our two worlds. Many believed the prophecy was nothing more than an old story, a comfort we told ourselves during the darkest years of our exile. And now?" "Now," Leora said quietly, "you have fallen from the surface, carrying blood stronger than any we have seen in generations, at the exact moment our king has begun to feel the seal weakening beneath his throne. You cannot blame them for looking at you the way they do." Alira felt the weight of countless expectations settling onto her shoulders, expectations she had never asked for, and did not yet understand how to carry. She thought of the frightened girl who had been dragged to the edge of the abyss only days before, and wondered how that same girl was now being looked at, as though she might be the answer to an ancient kingdom's prayers. Later that evening, Kaylin found her standing alone on one of the high balconies overlooking the glowing city, her arms wrapped around herself as she watched the wolves moving through the streets far below. "You look troubled," he said, joining her at the railing, his presence somehow both commanding and quietly comforting at the same time. "Everyone down here believes I am some kind of savior," Alira said without turning to face him. "A few days ago, my own pack believed I was a curse worth throwing away. Now, an entire kingdom believes I am their salvation. I do not know which version frightens me more." Kaylin was silent for a long moment, considering her words carefully. "Perhaps," he finally said, "you are neither of those things. Perhaps you are simply Alira Hartley, and whatever you become will be decided by your own choices, not by the fears or hopes of everyone around you." She turned to look at him then, surprised by the simplicity of his answer, and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite name. "That is a kind thing to say for a king who needs me to fix his broken kingdom." A faint smile touched the corner of Kaylin's mouth, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since her arrival. "I did not say I do not need you, Alira. I said your worth is not defined only by that need." Something warm stirred in Alira's chest at his words, something she was not yet ready to examine too closely. She turned back toward the glowing city instead, watching the silver veins pulse gently along the rooftops below. "Tell me about the training you mentioned," she said, changing the subject before her feelings could grow too complicated. "If I am meant to help repair this seal, I want to understand exactly what that requires of me. Kalen nodded, his expression turning serious once more. Tomorrow, we begin. Your body already carries the shadow blood needed to strengthen the seal, but that power lies dormant within you, buried beneath years of suppression by your former pack. Awakening it will not be simple, and it will not be painless, though I promise you, it will never be cruel. And if I cannot awaken it? If the blood inside me is too weak, or too buried to reach, then we will find another way, Kalen said firmly. I did not bring you into my kingdom to break you, Alira. Whatever training lies ahead, you will walk through it as my guest, and eventually, I hope, as something far more than that. Alira studied him carefully, trying to read the meaning behind his words, but before she could ask him to explain further, a sharp horn sounded somewhere deep within the palace, echoing across the glowing city like a warning bell. Kalen's expression shifted instantly, his calm demeanor replaced by something colder, more alert. What was that? Alira asked, her heart beginning to race. A signal from the outer boundary, Kalen said, already turning away from the balcony, his voice tight with tension. Someone has entered the tunnels, leading toward Nixheim. Someone from the surface world. Alira's stomach dropped. From the surface? Who would be foolish enough to come down here? Kalen's dark eyes met hers, and in them, she saw a warning she did not yet fully understand. I suspect, he said quietly, that your former pack has realized you did not die in that fall after all, and I suspect they are not pleased to learn it. The warmth of the moment they had just shared vanished instantly, replaced by a cold knot of dread settling deep in Alira's stomach. Whatever peace she had begun to find in this strange underground kingdom, it seemed her past was not yet finished with her, and it was already finding its way back into the dark. Kalen moved through the palace corridors with a speed Alira had not yet seen from him, his dark robes trailing behind him like shadow given shape. She hurried to keep pace, her mind racing with questions she did not have time to ask. If someone from the surface had truly found their way into the tunnels leading toward Nixheim, it meant her past had followed her further than she ever imagined possible. How is this even possible? She asked, nearly breathless as they descended a narrow staircase toward the lower gates of the city. The abyss was supposed to be sealed. No one from the surface has ever come down here before. No one has needed to, Kalen said grimly. Until now, the surface world believed this place was nothing more than a myth, a convenient story, used to frighten disobedient children. But fear can make people desperate, Alira, and desperate people sometimes find courage they never knew they had. They reached the lower gates, just as a small group of guards arrived, dragging a single figure between them, bound at the wrists, in a way that felt painfully familiar to Alira. Her breath caught in her throat as the figure lifted his head, and she found herself staring into the eyes of Gareth, the boy she had once been promised to in marriage, the boy who had stood silently by as her pack condemned her to death. Alira, Gareth breathed, his eyes widening in disbelief. You are alive. No thanks to you, Alira said coldly, crossing her arms as she studied him. Whatever soft feelings she had once carried for him had long since curdled into something bitter and hard. Kalen stepped forward, his presence radiating quiet authority as he addressed the guards. How did he enter the tunnels? He was found near the eastern passage, my king, one of the guards answered, alone and clearly unprepared for the journey. He nearly lost his life navigating the lower caverns before we intercepted him. Kalen turned his attention back to Gareth, his violet eyes cold and assessing. Why have you come here, wolf of the surface? Do you not fear the stories your own people tell about this place? Gareth swallowed hard, clearly unsettled by the sheer presence of the Obsidian king standing before him, yet he forced himself to speak. I came because I could not live with what we did, he said, his voice trembling slightly. After Alira fell, strange things began happening across Moonfall territory. The curse we believed her death would lift only grew worse. Crops failed. Sickness spread through the pack faster than before. The elders grew desperate, and in their desperation, they began speaking of finding another sacrifice. Alira's stomach turned cold. Another sacrifice? Who? Gareth's eyes met hers, guilt written plainly across his face. Marissa's younger cousin, a child barely 12 years old, whose eyes have recently begun to show the same silver ring as yours. Horror washed through Alira like ice water. They cannot possibly believe throwing another innocent child into this abyss will fix anything. They believe exactly that, Gareth said quietly. And I could not stand by and watch it happen again. Not after everything I allowed to happen to you. I came to find you, Alira. I came to warn you, and to beg for your help, if you are even willing to give it, after everything we did. Alira turned away from him, her mind spinning with anger, grief, and a strange, unwanted flicker of pity. Kaelin watched her carefully, allowing her the space to process what she had just heard, before he spoke again. This changes things, Kaelin said finally, addressing both Alira and his guards. If the surface pack is preparing another sacrifice, they clearly do not understand the true nature of what they are dealing with. Innocent blood, thrown into this chasm, will not restore the seal, nor will it lift any curse. It will only weaken the barrier further, and bring the kingdom closer to the very disaster your own ancestors sought to prevent. Then we have to stop them, Alira said firmly, turning back to face him, all traces of hesitation gone from her voice. Whatever anger I carry for my former pack, I will not allow another child to suffer the same fate I did. Kaelin studied her for a long moment, something like pride flickering behind his dark eyes. Your compassion does you credit, Alira, especially given everything that was done to you. But returning to the surface carries great risk, both for you and for the stability of this kingdom. The seal grows weaker each time it is crossed carelessly. Then we cross it carefully, Alira said. But we cross it. I refuse to hide down here in safety, while a child faces the same darkness I did. Gareth watched the exchange with wide eyes, clearly surprised by the quiet strength radiating from the girl he had once dismissed as simply tainted and unfortunate. I did not expect to find you like this, he admitted softly, stronger than before. You do not know me at all, Alira said coldly, refusing to soften toward him despite his apparent regret. You made your choice on the night they threw me into this chasm. Nothing you say now will erase that. Kaelin stepped between them slightly, his tone firm, but not unkind. Whatever history exists between the two of you can be addressed later. Right now, our priority must be preventing further harm, both to the surface world and to the stability of this kingdom's seal. He turned to address his guards. Prepare a small party. Alira and I will travel to the surface through the old passage beneath the western ridge. Gareth will accompany us as well, since he alone knows the current state of affairs within the Moonfall Pack. You intend to come with me? Alira asked, surprised. I will not send you into danger alone, Kaelin said simply, as though the answer required no further explanation. Whatever awaits us above, we will face it together. Something in his quiet certainty settled the anxious storm building within Alira's chest, even as fear over what lay ahead continued to churn beneath the surface. She had never imagined she would return to the world above so soon after being thrown from it, and certainly never imagined she would return with an ancient king by her side, prepared to defend a kingdom she was only beginning to understand. As the guards moved to prepare for the journey, Kaelin turned to Alira one final time, his expression softening slightly. Are you certain you wish to face them again so soon? No one would think less of you if you chose to remain here instead, safe within these walls. Alira met his gaze steadily, feeling the last remnants of the frightened girl who had been dragged to the edge of the abyss begin to fade, replaced by someone new, someone stronger. They took everything from me once, she said quietly. I refuse to let them take anything more, from me or from anyone else. Kaelin nodded slowly, respect evident in his expression. Then let us prepare. Dawn above the surface will arrive soon, whether the world is ready for what walks toward it or not. Outside the palace walls, deep within the tunnels connecting the underground kingdom to the world above, the ancient seal pulsed once more, weaker than before, as though sensing the approaching storm that both worlds were about to face together. The passage beneath the western ridge was narrow and winding, carved by centuries of dripping water rather than by any hand, and Alira found herself grateful for the faint silver light that clung to Kaelin's skin, illuminating the path ahead of them as they climbed steadily upward. Gareth walked a few paces behind, silent and tense, clearly uncomfortable in the presence of the Obsidian king he had grown up hearing described only in frightening whispers. How much farther? Alira asked, her breath beginning to fog slightly, as the air around them grew cooler, a sure sign they were nearing the surface once more. Not far, Kalen answered, his voice low. The passage exits near the old stone circle, at the edge of Moonfall territory. From there, we will need to move carefully. If your former pack senses my presence too soon, they may act out of fear, rather than reason. They already act out of fear, Alira muttered. That is precisely how I ended up falling into your kingdom in the first place. They continued climbing in silence, until finally, a thin sliver of pale moonlight appeared ahead of them, growing wider with every step, until they emerged from the tunnel into the cool night air of the surface world. Alira stopped for a moment, overwhelmed by the sight of the stars above her, the same stars she had once believed she would never see again. It feels strange, she admitted softly, being back here. Take whatever moment you need, Kalen said gently, standing close beside her, but we cannot linger long. Gareth led them quietly through the familiar paths of Moonfall territory, staying well clear of the main village, where most of the pack resided. As they moved through the trees, Alira felt her senses sharpening in ways she had never experienced before her time in Nixheim, catching scents and sounds that would have gone unnoticed only days earlier. Whatever training she had begun beneath the earth seemed to already be awakening something new within her. They reached the edge of a small clearing, just as raised voices carried through the night air. Alira's stomach tightened as she recognized the location immediately. It was the same clearing where the pack elders often gathered to discuss matters too sensitive for the wider community, and where, she realized with dawning horror, they were likely preparing for the very sacrifice Gareth had warned them about. Kalen raised a hand, signaling for silence, and the three of them crept closer to the tree line, careful to remain hidden within the shadows. Alira peered through the branches and felt her blood run cold at what she saw. A young girl, no older than 12, stood trembling at the center of the clearing, her wrists bound, just as Alira's had been only days before. Marissa stood nearby, speaking in low, urgent tones to Aldrich and several other elders, while Edmund Hartley watched from a short distance away, his expression torn between duty and something that almost looked like guilt. We cannot wait any longer, Aldrich was saying, his voice carrying easily across the quiet clearing. The sickness spreads faster with each passing night. If Alira's death did not satisfy the abyss, then perhaps a stronger sacrifice will. She is only a child, Edmund said quietly, though his voice lacked the conviction needed to actually stop what was happening. She carries the same tainted blood as your daughter did, Aldrich snapped back. Better one child suffers than the entire pack falls to ruin. Alira felt fury building inside her chest, hot and fierce, unlike anything she had experienced during her own sacrifice. Back then, she had felt only fear and grief. Now, watching another innocent child face the same cruel fate, she felt something else entirely, a fierce protective anger that seemed to hum beneath her skin, like static before a storm. We have to stop this now, she whispered, already moving to step forward, but Kalen's hand caught her arm gently, holding her back. Wait, he murmured. If we reveal ourselves too soon, they may panic and act rashly. Let me approach first. They fear me far more than they fear you, and that fear may be exactly what stops them from making a fatal mistake. Alira hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to rush forward and protect the frightened child standing in the clearing, but she forced herself to trust Kalen's judgment, nodding once in reluctant agreement. Kalen stepped out from the shadows first, his tall figure emerging into the moonlight with a quiet, commanding presence that immediately silenced the gathered elders. Gasps echoed through the clearing as pack members recognized, or perhaps simply sensed, the ancient power radiating from him. You dare bring another innocent child to the edge of my kingdom, Kalen said, his voice carrying easily across the stunned silence, cold and razor-sharp, just as you once did with Alira Hartley. Aldrich's face went pale as understanding dawned. The Obsidian King, he breathed, taking an involuntary step backward. The stories were true. Every word, Kalen said coldly, and every sacrifice you have thrown into that abyss over the generations has done nothing but weaken the very seal that protects your world from far greater dangers than the ones you imagine. Edmund Hartley stepped forward hesitantly, his eyes wide with disbelief. If the sacrifices did nothing, then why has the sickness continued to spread across our lands? Because your sickness was never caused by a curse, requiring blood to lift it, Kalen said. It was caused by your own fear, spreading through your pack like poison, turning neighbor against neighbor, driving away the very blood that might have protected you all along. At that moment, Illyra stepped forward from the shadows, standing beside Kaelin with her chin lifted high, no longer the frightened girl who had once been dragged to the edge of this same clearing. Gasps rippled through the crowd as pack members recognized her, some faces filled with shock, others with something closer to shame. "Illyra," Edmund whispered, staring at his daughter as though seeing a ghost. "You survived." "No thanks to any of you," Illyra said, her voice steady and clear, carrying easily across the silent clearing. "I fell into a kingdom none of you ever believed existed, ruled by a king none of you ever believed was real, and I have returned tonight to make certain that no other child suffers the fate you tried to force upon me." Marissa's expression twisted with something between fear and defiance. "You cannot simply walk back into this pack after everything that happened. You do not belong here." "You are right," Illyra said calmly, surprising even herself with how steady her voice remained. "I do not belong here anymore. But this child does not belong at the bottom of that chasm either, and I will not allow you to throw her away the same way you threw me." The clearing fell into tense, uncertain silence, every pack member watching the standoff unfold with wide, uncertain eyes, unsure whether the night was about to end in violence or in something else entirely. Aldrich recovered from his initial shock quickly, his expression hardening into something defensive as he stepped forward, clearly unwilling to abandon a plan he had spent weeks convincing the pack to accept. "You may have survived the fall, Illyra Hartley, but that does not erase the danger your blood represents. The prophecy has always spoken of tainted children needing to be removed for the pack's protection. The prophecy you speak of is a lie," Kaelin said sharply, his patience clearly beginning to wear thin. "Passed down through generations by wolves, too frightened to question it, twisted over time to justify cruelty you were never meant to commit. And why should we believe the word of a creature from the abyss over the wisdom of our own ancestors?" Aldrich challenged, though his voice carried less certainty than before. Illyra stepped forward before Kaelin could respond, meeting Aldrich's gaze directly. "Because I lived it," she said firmly. "I fell into that abyss, believing I would die, and instead, I found a kingdom filled with wolves your ancestors drove into hiding, out of fear, not danger. The same fear that convinced you it was acceptable to throw an innocent child into a chasm, rather than question whether your beliefs were ever true to begin with." The young girl bound at the center of the clearing let out a soft whimper, drawing Illyra's attention immediately. She moved toward the child without hesitation, ignoring the tension rippling through the gathered elders, and knelt down to gently untie the ropes binding her small wrists. "You are safe now," Illyra murmured softly, meeting the girl's frightened eyes with as much warmth as she could offer. "No one is going to hurt you tonight." "Illyra," Edmund said quietly, stepping closer, his voice trembling slightly. "I did not want this. I want you to know that, whatever else you believe about me." Illyra looked up at her father, feeling a complicated tangle of emotions rise within her chest. Anger, grief, and something smaller, quieter, that still wished, foolishly perhaps, for a different outcome between them. "You stood by and let it happen anyway," she said, her voice steady, despite the ache in her chest. "Wanting is not the same as acting, father." Edmund lowered his eyes, unable to hold her gaze any longer, and the silence that followed carried more weight than any argument could have. Marissa, watching the exchange with narrowed eyes, finally stepped forward, her voice sharp with desperation. "If we do not offer another sacrifice, the sickness will continue to spread. Are you willing to let this entire pack suffer for the sake of one child?" "The sickness will not stop because you throw more innocent blood into that chasm," Kaelin said firmly, addressing the entire gathered crowd now, rather than Marissa alone. "It will stop when you address the true source of your troubles, which lies not in any curse, but in choices made generations ago, by wolves, who chose exile and cruelty over understanding." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, uncertain and afraid, as pack members began to glance at one another, clearly questioning beliefs they had held their entire lives, without ever pausing to examine them closely. "There is a way to heal this properly," Illyra said, straightening, as she rose to her feet, still holding the young girl's hand, protectively in her own. "Not through more sacrifice, but through restoring the balance your ancestors broke, when they sealed away an entire kingdom out of fear. "And how would you propose we do that?" Aldrich asked, though his tone had softened slightly, uncertainty creeping into his previously rigid conviction. Kaelin answered, before Alira could speak. "The seal between our two worlds requires renewal through willing connection, not forced sacrifice. Alira's presence within my kingdom has already begun strengthening what generations of fear have weakened. Further violence, further cruelty, will only continue to damage what desperately needs healing instead." Edmund looked between his daughter and the ancient king standing beside her, something shifting behind his tired eyes. "What would you have us do then?" "Release your fear," Alira said simply, her voice carrying clearly across the silent clearing. "Stop hunting down children whose blood frightens you, and instead, allow understanding to replace generations of cruelty. That is the only true way to heal whatever ails this pack." The clearing remained silent for a long moment, elders and pack members alike absorbing the weight of everything that had just unfolded before them. Finally, Aldrich lowered his staff, his shoulders sagging slightly, as decades of certainty crumbled within him. "If what you say is true," he said slowly, "then we have wronged you gravely, Alira Hartley, and we have very nearly wronged this child in exactly the same way." "You have," Alira said simply, refusing to soften the truth for his comfort. "But whether you choose to learn from that wrong, or continue repeating it, is entirely up to you now." She turned to the young girl still holding her hand, kneeling down once more, to meet her frightened eyes directly. "You are not tainted," she said softly, echoing words she wished someone had once said to her. "You are simply different, and different does not mean dangerous." The girl's lips trembled, and finally, she threw her small arms around Alira's neck, clinging to her tightly, as quiet tears began to fall. Alira held her gently, feeling something warm settle into place within her own chest, a sense of purpose she had never expected to find on this side of the abyss. Kaelin watched the scene unfold with quiet approval, his violet eyes soft in a way Alira had not yet seen from him. When she finally rose to her feet again, still holding the girl's hand, he stepped closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You have done something tonight that generations of fear could not undo," he murmured. "You have shown them mercy, even after everything they took from you." "I did not do it for them," Alira admitted quietly. "I did it so no other child would ever have to feel what I felt, falling through that darkness, believing no one in the world cared whether she lived or died." Kaelin's expression softened further, something unspoken passing between them in the quiet moonlight. Around them, the pack slowly began to disperse, murmuring quietly among themselves, the seeds of doubt finally planted where blind fear had once stood unchallenged. Yet even as the tension in the clearing eased, Alira could not shake a quiet unease settling low in her stomach. The battle over one child's life had been won tonight, but she understood, with a certainty she could not quite explain, that the greater struggle facing both worlds, above and below, had only just begun. Not every member of the Moonfall Pack accepted the truth so easily. As Alira, Kaelin, and Gareth made their way back toward the tree line, intending to return the rescued child safely to her family before departing for the tunnels once more, a low growl rumbled from the shadows ahead of them. A group of pack warriors emerged, blocking their path, their expressions hard and unwilling to accept the peaceful resolution the elders had just witnessed. "Bram," Gareth muttered under his breath, recognizing the warrior leading the group. "He has always believed the old stories without question. He will not simply let this go." Bram stepped forward, his eyes narrowed with suspicion as he studied Kaelin carefully. "Whatever tricks you have used to convince the elders, creature of the abyss, I do not believe for a moment that your kind means us no harm. Wolves like you were sealed away for good reason." "You know nothing of my kind, beyond the fear your ancestors chose to believe," Kaelin said calmly, though a subtle tension had entered his voice, a readiness Alira had not seen from him before. "I know that our pack has suffered for years, while your kingdom hides beneath our feet," Bram snapped back. "And I refuse to let you walk out of here with one of our own, taking her deeper into whatever darkness you rule over." "She is not yours to claim," Alira said sharply, stepping forward despite the tension radiating from the warriors surrounding them. "I make my own choices now, Bram. Something none of you ever allowed me to do before." Bram's gaze shifted to her, cold and unyielding. Your choices matter little if they endanger this entire pack. If the elders are too foolish to see the danger standing before them, then it falls to warriors like myself to protect what they will not. Before anyone could respond, Bram lunged forward, shifting mid-motion into his wolf form, his warriors following suit almost instantly. Gareth pulled the young girl back toward the safety of the tree line, shielding her small body with his own, while Alira felt her heart race as the pack warriors circled closer, teeth bared, eyes glinting dangerously in the moonlight. Kalen stepped smoothly in front of Alira, his calm demeanor unshaken, despite the sudden threat surrounding them. "Stand down," he warned, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. "This does not need to end in bloodshed." Bram's only response was a low, warning growl, and within seconds, the warriors surged forward in a coordinated attack. Kalen moved with a speed Alira had not anticipated, shadow curling around his hands like living smoke as he met the first attacker head-on, deflecting the charge with practiced ease that spoke of centuries of experience. Alira felt something shift within her own body as adrenaline surged through her veins, an unfamiliar heat rising beneath her skin, curling at the edges of her vision like dark mist. Without fully understanding what she was doing, she raised her hands instinctively as one of the warriors lunged toward her, and a wave of shadow energy burst from her palms, knocking the attacking wolf backward with startling force. She stared down at her own hands in shock, breathing hard, barely able to process what had just happened. "What was that?" she whispered. "Your blood," Kalen called out, not taking his eyes off the warriors still circling him. "Awakening, exactly as I told you it eventually would." Bram, seeing his warrior thrown back so easily, hesitated for the first time, uncertainty flickering across his sharp features. "This is exactly the kind of power the old stories warned us about," he snarled, though there was a new note of caution beneath his aggression now. "This is exactly the kind of power your ancestors feared, enough to drive an entire kingdom into hiding," Kalen corrected sharply. "Not because it was evil, but because they could not control it, and fear of losing control has always been a far more dangerous poison than the blood itself." Alira steadied her breathing, feeling the strange new energy settle beneath her skin once more, no longer frightening now that she understood, however faintly, where it came from. She stepped forward, placing herself firmly beside Kalen, rather than behind him. "I did not come back here tonight to fight my own pack," she said, addressing Bram directly, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her. "But I will defend myself, and I will defend this child, if you force my hand." Bram studied her for a long moment, clearly torn between the deeply ingrained fear of his upbringing and the undeniable restraint both Alira and Kalen had shown despite having every opportunity to cause serious harm. Finally, reluctantly, he lowered his stance, signaling for his warriors to stand down as well. "This is not over," he said darkly, though the fight had clearly drained from his voice. "The pack will not easily accept what happened here tonight." "Then perhaps the pack needs time to learn," Kalen said evenly, rather than react from fear alone. "But know this, warrior, should you ever threaten Alira or any other innocent life again, I will not extend the same restraint I have shown you tonight." Bram said nothing further, simply turning and disappearing back into the tree line with his warriors following silently behind him. The tension in the clearing slowly eased, though Alira remained tense, her hands still faintly tingling from the strange new power that had surged through her only moments before. Gareth emerged from the tree line, the young girl still held protectively close to his side, his expression a mixture of awe and lingering fear. "I have never seen anything like that," he admitted quietly, looking at Alira with newfound uncertainty. "The power that came from you." "Neither had I," Alira admitted, still staring down at her own hands as though they belonged to someone else entirely. Kalen placed a steady hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her in a way she had not expected. "That power has always been yours, Alira. Tonight was simply the first time it was allowed to answer your call." She looked up at him, feeling a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration swirling together within her chest. Whatever she had been before falling into the abyss, she was undeniably becoming something else entirely now. Something with the power to protect, to defend, and perhaps, to change the course of two entire worlds forever. As they finally made their way back toward the tunnels leading beneath the earth, Alira could not shake the feeling that tonight's confrontation, however contained, had only delayed a much larger storm still gathering on the horizon, one that neither the surface world nor the kingdom of Nixheim would be able to avoid for very much longer. They returned to Nixheim just as the faint glow along the palace walls seemed to pulse brighter than before, as though the kingdom itself had felt the shift within Alira the moment her power first awakened beneath the moonlight. Leora met them at the gates, her sharp eyes widening as she took in Alira's expression, equal parts exhaustion and quiet wonder. Something has changed, Leora observed immediately, studying Alira with newfound curiosity. I can sense it even from here. Her blood has awakened, Kaelin confirmed, leading them through the gates and into the palace halls. Sooner than I anticipated, though perhaps that is exactly what this kingdom needed. News spread quickly through the underground city, and by the time evening settled over Nixheim, wolves gathered in the streets below, murmuring excitedly among themselves as word passed from one household to the next. The prophecy, once dismissed by some as nothing more than a comforting legend, suddenly felt achingly real to an entire kingdom that had spent centuries waiting for exactly this moment. Alira found the sudden attention overwhelming, and after the events of the night, she welcomed the quiet solitude of the training chamber Kaelin led her toward, a wide circular room deep within the palace, its walls lined with softly glowing crystals that pulsed gently in rhythm with unseen currents of magic. This is where your training will truly begin, Kaelin explained, gesturing toward the open space at the center of the room. What you experienced tonight was instinct, raw and uncontrolled. If you are to master this power, rather than be overwhelmed by it, you will need discipline, patience, and practice. Alira nodded, rolling her shoulders as she stepped into the center of the chamber, feeling the strange energy from earlier still humming faintly beneath her skin. Then teach me, she said simply. I do not intend to feel powerless ever again. Over the following days, Kaelin worked with her tirelessly, guiding her through exercises meant to help her sense and control the shadow energy coursing through her veins. At first, her attempts were clumsy, energy bursting from her hands at unpredictable moments, sometimes scattering harmlessly against the chamber walls, other times knocking over training equipment with startling force. Focus, Kaelin instructed calmly, during one particularly frustrating session, as Alira's latest attempt sent a burst of shadow energy careening wildly across the room. The power responds to your emotions, Alira, but it must be guided by your intention, not simply released by your feelings. Easy for you to say, Alira muttered, wiping sweat from her brow as she caught her breath. You have had centuries to master this. A rare, genuine laugh escaped Kaelin, surprising them both with its warmth. I was not always as composed as I appear now, he admitted, stepping closer to demonstrate the proper stance once more. There was a time, long ago, when my own control was far from perfect. Alira studied him curiously, intrigued by this rare glimpse into his past. What happened? How did you learn control? Kaelin's expression grew distant for a moment, memories clearly surfacing that he did not often revisit. I lost someone I cared for deeply, many years ago, during a moment when my own emotions overwhelmed my judgment, he said quietly. It taught me, painfully, that power without discipline causes far more harm than good. Alira's expression softened, recognizing the weight behind his words. I am sorry, she said gently. You do not have to share more, if it is difficult. It is not something I speak of often, Kaelin admitted, but perhaps sharing it now will help you understand why I insist so strongly on patience and control, rather than simply allowing your power to run wild. They continued training late into what passed for evening within the underground kingdom, and gradually, Alira began noticing genuine improvement in her ability to summon and direct the shadow energy at will. Small successes brought quiet satisfaction, though the true test of her abilities, she suspected, still lay somewhere ahead of her. During a brief pause between exercises, as Alira caught her breath near the edge of the chamber, Kaelin approached quietly, offering her a cup of cool water from a nearby basin. You have made remarkable progress, he said, genuine admiration evident in his tone. Faster than I expected, even accounting for the strength of your bloodline. I have a good teacher, Alira replied, accepting the water gratefully. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither of them looked away, something unspoken passing quietly between them in the soft glow of the training chamber. Elira felt her heart quicken, an entirely different kind of energy stirring within her chest, one that had nothing to do with shadow magic at all. Elira, Kalen began softly, his usual composure faltering slightly. Since the moment you fell into this kingdom, I have found myself drawn to you in ways I did not expect, and frankly, do not fully understand. Elira's breath caught, her heart pounding loudly in her ears. I feel it too, she admitted quietly, surprising herself with how easily the words came. Though I did not expect to feel anything at all, given everything that happened before I arrived here. Kalen reached out gently, his fingers brushing softly against her cheek, a touch far more tender than she ever imagined the powerful, composed Obsidian king capable of offering. I have ruled this kingdom alone for longer than I care to remember, he admitted softly. I never expected to find someone who might stand beside me, not simply as an ally, but as an equal. Elira leaned slightly into his touch, feeling warmth spread through her chest despite the cool air of the chamber surrounding them. I never expected to find a place where I truly belonged, she whispered. Yet somehow, standing here with you, it feels exactly like that. Their faces drew closer, the space between them shrinking slowly, deliberately, until finally, their lips met in a soft, tender kiss that seemed to still the very air around them. When they finally parted, Elira felt something settle deep within her chest, a quiet certainty she had not expected to find so soon after everything she had lost. Whatever challenges still lie ahead of us, Kalen murmured softly, resting his forehead gently against hers. I am glad, more than I can properly express, that you fell into my kingdom, Elira Hartley. So am I, Elira whispered back, smiling for what felt like the first time in longer than she could remember. Yet even amid the warmth of the moment, a faint tremor rippled through the chamber floor beneath their feet, subtle but unmistakable, a reminder that somewhere deep beneath the kingdom, the ancient seal continued to weaken, and whatever lay dormant beneath it was growing restless, waiting for the moment it would finally break free. The tremor that had rippled through the training chamber floor proved to be only a warning of what was still to come. 2 nights later, a deep, groaning sound echoed through the lowest levels of Nixheim, shaking dust loose from ceilings that had not moved in centuries. Elira woke with a start, her heart pounding, instinctively reaching for the shadow energy now familiar beneath her skin, as she rushed from her chamber, to find Kalen already standing in the corridor outside, his expression grim. The seal, he said, before she could even ask. It has weakened further than I feared. They hurried together toward the deepest chamber of the palace, a place Elira had not yet been permitted to visit, sealed behind heavy stone doors, etched with the same silver markings she had seen scattered throughout the kingdom. Kalen pressed his palm against the center of the door, and slowly, with a groan of ancient stone, it swung open, to reveal a massive underground cavern, at the center of which pulsed a great circle of shimmering silver light, embedded directly into the rock floor. Elira stared at the seal in awe and fear, watching as faint cracks spread visibly across its surface, flickering unstable light escaping through each new fracture. This is it, she breathed. The seal keeping the surface, and this kingdom divided. And keeping something far older contained, Kalen said grimly, his eyes fixed on the pulsing cracks. The wolves your ancestors feared were never truly the greatest danger. My people were simply the guardians, placed here to contain something worse, something ancient and hungry, sealed away long before either surface or shadow wolves ever existed. A cold chill ran down Elira's spine. What exactly is contained beneath this seal? A being of pure shadow, without conscience or mercy, Kalen answered quietly. Older than any prophecy, older than my own kingdom. It was sealed here, by the combined strength of both surface and shadow bloodlines working together, centuries ago, before fear drove our 2 peoples apart. And if the seal breaks completely? Kalen's expression darkened further. Then it will rise, and it will not distinguish between shadow blood and moonlit blood. It will consume everything in its path, surface and underground alike. Elira felt the weight of this new understanding settle heavily onto her shoulders. How do we stop it? How do we restore the seal before it breaks entirely? The seal requires exactly what was used to create it, Kalen explained. A willing bond between shadow blood and surface blood, freely given, not forced through fear or sacrifice as your ancestors mistakenly believed for generations. Understanding dawned slowly in Alira's mind, and she turned to look at Kaelin directly. "You mean us?" "I mean a bond stronger than mere blood alone," Kaelin said softly, reaching for her hand. "A bond built on trust, on choice, and yes, on love, freely given between both worlds. That is what your ancestors misunderstood when they began sacrificing innocent children instead. Fear can never restore what only genuine connection can heal." Alira squeezed his hand, feeling a steady resolve settle within her, despite the enormity of what lay ahead. "Then let us restore it properly, this time." Kaelin led her carefully toward the edge of the Great Seal, explaining quietly what the ritual would require: an exchange of shared energy, shadow and light intertwining freely, requiring absolute trust between them both. Alira listened intently, memorizing every detail, aware that a single mistake could have consequences far beyond anything she had yet faced. As they prepared to begin, Leora and several other advisors gathered at the edge of the chamber, along with Gareth, who had chosen to remain in Nixheim following the confrontation on the surface, his earlier guilt slowly transforming into genuine respect for the kingdom and its people. "Are you ready?" Kaelin asked gently, standing beside Alira at the very edge of the pulsing seal. "I have never been more ready," Alira answered, meeting his gaze with quiet determination. Together, they knelt at the edge of the circle, joining hands above the shimmering silver light. Kaelin closed his eyes, drawing upon centuries of shadow magic, while Alira focused inward, calling upon the awakened power flowing through her own veins. Slowly, their combined energy began to flow outward, shadow and silver light, intertwining in delicate, glowing patterns above the ancient seal. The cracks along the seal's surface began to shimmer brighter, then, gradually, to knit back together, ancient magic responding at last to genuine connection rather than forced sacrifice. Alira felt warmth spreading through her chest, an overwhelming sense of rightness settling deep within her, as though her entire life had been leading toward exactly this moment. Yet just as the seal began to stabilize, a sudden surge of dark energy erupted from below, a deep, guttural growl echoing up from beneath the shrinking cracks, as though whatever lay imprisoned beneath the seal sensed its coming defeat and refused to surrender without one final struggle. "Hold steady," Kaelin commanded through gritted teeth, his grip tightening around Alira's hands. "Do not let fear break your focus now." Alira closed her eyes, drawing deeper into the well of power within her, remembering every ounce of pain, every moment of fear she had overcome since the night she fell into this kingdom. She thought of the young girl she had saved, of Kaelin's quiet faith in her, of the strength she had discovered within herself, despite everyone who once called her tainted and unworthy. "I am not afraid," she said firmly, opening her eyes once more, silver light blazing brightly around her hands, as the surge of dark energy below began to weaken beneath their combined strength. Slowly, painstakingly, the cracks along the seal sealed shut entirely, the pulsing silver light stabilizing into a steady, calm glow, the ancient magic finally restored after centuries of careful neglect and misunderstanding. The guttural growl beneath the earth faded into silence, the great danger once more safely contained beneath layers of restored, unbreakable magic. Alira slumped slightly, exhausted from the effort, and Kaelin immediately steadied her, wrapping a strong arm around her shoulders. "You did it," he said softly, admiration evident in every word. "We did it, together." Around the chamber, quiet gasps of relief rippled through the gathered advisors, followed swiftly by murmurs of awe and celebration. Leora stepped forward first, bowing deeply before Alira, an action quickly mirrored by every other wolf present within the chamber. "The prophecy has been fulfilled," Leora said, her voice filled with quiet reverence. "The seal stands restored, and the true heir to both worlds stands before us." Alira looked around at the bowed heads surrounding her, feeling the weight of the moment settle deeply within her chest, no longer as fear, but as quiet, humbled purpose. Whatever life she had lost the night her own pack threw her into the darkness, she had found something far greater waiting for her at the bottom of that fall, a purpose, a home, and a love she had never expected to discover. Kaelin turned to face her fully, his expression soft with unmistakable affection, as he took both her hands gently in his own. "Elira Hartley," he said quietly, loud enough for the entire chamber to hear, "you have restored balance to a kingdom broken for centuries, and you have done so not through fear or sacrifice, but through courage and genuine strength. There is no one more deserving of standing beside me as ruler of this kingdom." Elira felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes, though this time they were tears of joy rather than grief. "I never imagined I would find a crown at the bottom of an abyss," she whispered. "Sometimes," Kaelin murmured softly, brushing a gentle hand against her cheek, "the greatest treasures are found exactly where we least expect them." The days following the restoration of the seal passed in a whirlwind of celebration throughout Nixheim. Wolves who had lived for generations beneath the earth, hidden away by ancient fear, gathered in the glowing streets to celebrate the fulfillment of a prophecy many had long since stopped believing would ever come true. Elira walked among them, still adjusting to the warmth and respect now offered so freely by people who, only weeks before, she had never known existed. Kaelin announced that a formal ceremony would take place within the grand hall of the palace, the very chamber where Elira had first landed after her fall, to properly crown her as Queen of Nixheim. Leora took charge of the preparations, her sharp efficiency ensuring that every detail honored both the ancient traditions of the kingdom and the remarkable journey that had brought Elira to this moment. On the evening of the ceremony, Elira stood quietly in a chamber adjoining the great hall, dressed in flowing robes of deep silver and black, woven with threads that seemed to shimmer faintly like starlight caught in shadow. She studied her reflection in a polished obsidian mirror, hardly recognizing the composed, confident woman staring back at her. "You look every bit the queen you are about to become," Leora said warmly, stepping into the chamber with a soft smile. "I still cannot quite believe it," Elira admitted, smoothing the fabric of her robes nervously. "A few weeks ago, I was being thrown into a chasm as a sacrifice. Now I am about to be crowned queen of an entire kingdom. Life has a strange way of turning cruelty into unexpected opportunity," Leora said gently, "though I imagine it does not erase the pain of everything you endured to arrive here." "No," Elira agreed softly, "but it has taught me that the people who once called me tainted were wrong about everything that truly mattered." A soft knock interrupted their conversation, and Gareth entered quietly, his expression uncertain as he approached her. "I wanted to see you before the ceremony began," he said. "To apologize, properly, for everything I failed to do the night your own pack condemned you." Elira studied him for a long moment, remembering the anger and betrayal she had once felt so deeply toward him. Yet standing here now, surrounded by the life she had built for herself despite everything, she found that anger had softened into something closer to quiet forgiveness. "You came to warn me when it mattered," she said finally. "You helped protect that child alongside us. Perhaps that does not erase the past entirely, but it does mean something." Gareth's shoulders relaxed slightly, gratitude evident in his tired eyes. "Thank you, Elira. I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I am grateful for it nonetheless." "What will you do now?" Elira asked. "Will you return to the surface?" "Why?" Gareth hesitated before answering. "I believe I will remain here, if the kingdom will have me. I have seen too much now to return to a life built on fear and misunderstanding." Elira smiled softly, genuine warmth in her expression. "Then perhaps Nixheim has room for one more soul, seeking a fresh beginning." As Gareth departed to take his place among the gathering crowd, Kaelin entered the chamber, dressed in ceremonial robes far grander than his usual attire, though his eyes, as always, remained fixed warmly on Elira the moment he saw her. "You are breathtaking," he said softly, crossing the room to take her hands gently in his own. "I am nervous," Elira admitted, laughing softly despite herself. "I never imagined standing here, about to become queen of a kingdom I did not know existed, only weeks ago." "You have earned this place, through courage few could ever match," Kaelin said firmly, his violet eyes shining with quiet pride. "Whatever nerves you feel tonight, know that this entire kingdom stands ready to follow wherever your strength leads us." Together, they walked toward the entrance of the great hall, where the assembled wolves of Nixheim waited eagerly, their faces alight with hope and celebration. As Elira stepped through the doorway, she was struck once more by the sheer beauty of the chamber, its obsidian walls gleaming brightly beneath countless flickering lights, the silver veins running through the floor, pulsing gently in rhythm with the collective joy of the gathered crowd. Kaelin led her to the center of the hall, where an ancient crown rested atop a pedestal carved from the same gleaming obsidian stone as the palace itself, its delicate silver filigree catching the light in ways that seemed almost alive. Leora stepped forward, lifting the crown carefully, her expression solemn and proud as she addressed the gathered crowd. "Tonight, we witness the fulfillment of an ancient promise," Leora announced, her voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "A promise made long before any of us were born, that one day, a wolf touched equally by surface and shadow would restore balance to our broken world." She turned to Alira, holding the crown gently between her hands. "Alira Hartley, do you accept the responsibility of ruling this kingdom, not through fear or force, but through compassion, courage, and genuine understanding?" "I do," Alira answered clearly, her voice steady, despite the emotion swelling within her chest. Leora placed the crown gently atop Alira's head, and immediately, a soft wave of silver light rippled outward from the crown, washing gently over the entire gathered crowd, as though the kingdom itself was formally welcoming its new queen. Cheers erupted throughout the hall, warm and genuine. Wolves who had once been forced into hiding, now celebrating openly the arrival of hope they had waited centuries to witness. Kaelin stepped forward, taking Alira's hand once more as he addressed the crowd. "Tonight, Nixheim gains not only a queen, but a partner equal to myself in strength, wisdom, and compassion. Together, we will ensure that fear never again dictates the fate of innocent lives, whether above the earth or beneath it." The crowd roared its approval, and Alira felt tears of genuine happiness slip down her cheeks as she looked out over the sea of joyful faces before her, faces belonging to a people who had accepted her, not out of fear, but out of hope and genuine welcome. Later that evening, after the celebrations had quieted and the great hall had emptied, Alira stood alone, with Kaelin on the high balcony overlooking the glowing city, the crown resting gently atop her head, its weight no longer strange, but instead, oddly comforting. "From the girl thrown into an abyss as a sacrifice," Kaelin murmured softly, wrapping his arms gently around her from behind, "to the queen, who saved not one, but two entire worlds." Alira leaned back against him, feeling utterly at peace for the first time since the night her own pack had cast her away. "I suppose my former pack unknowingly gave me the greatest gift of my life," she said softly, "even if it was never their intention." "Sometimes," Kaelin whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "The deepest fall leads directly to the greatest rise." Alira smiled, watching the glowing lights of Nixheim stretch out beneath her, a kingdom she now called home, standing beside a king who had seen her worth long before she had learned to see it herself. Whatever challenges still awaited them in the days ahead, she faced them now not as a frightened sacrifice thrown away by those who feared her, but as a queen, crowned not through conquest or cruelty, but through courage, compassion, and a love freely given between two worlds finally united once more.